Well, one thing every Republican last night seemed to agree on is that raising the minimum wage is a bad idea. In fact, Donald Trump seems to want to lower the minimum wage. But the minimum wage exists for a reason. You know, it hasn't been raised in years. Eric, isn't it time to raise the minimum wage, and how much should we raise it by?
It's absolutely time to raise it. How much? It depends. I mean, federally, I guess it's tough because I don't know the U.S. economy as well, but assuming prices are more or less the same, I think anywhere from 13 to 15 would be a livable wage. It wouldn't be comfortable living, but it's something you could survive on a lot better, depending, of course, on what city you live in. But that's the thing. In certain cities, it may need to be higher. For example, minimum wage in New York City is impossible. You cannot survive on that. There's no chance. You have to go on every single benefit possible, plus your wage. And even then, people making 50,000 are still struggling. You hear a lot of fast food workers saying that $15 seems to be the magic number. I don't have an issue with it personally. I think that if we increase the minimum wage, the whole scare that jobs will disappear is not true. The price effect on the McDonald's hamburger, for example, would be minuscule. It wouldn't actually make the prices go that much higher so that people would suddenly start boycotting the place. I think I read somewhere, the price for Big Mac could go up 50 cents to compensate for that $5 wage increase. And I'm willing to pay that as here in Canada, when we compare our combos, for example, I believe you guys pay anywhere from $7 or around there. We pay about 10 or 11 for a combo at McDonald's here in Canada. And people pay that every day. Nobody has an issue. And I don't think the majority of Americans would mind paying slightly more for a Big Mac if it meant that the employees had a livable wage and could live a comfortable life.
What is the minimum wage in Canada?
In Canada, it is 10.25 or 10.50. It goes up a little bit every couple of years.
And is it different in Toronto, or is that nationwide?
No, it's pretty much nationwide.
Well, Peter, I mean, that's a fair point. It's a lot. $15 goes a lot farther in Mississippi than it does in New York. Should this be a federal issue, or should it be left up to the states?
Well, right now, the system we have in the United States, the federal government establishes a minimum, I guess. And states are welcome to set a higher minimum wage if they want to. And cities are welcome to establish a higher minimum wage. An important corollary to raising the minimum wage has to do with the number of hours people can work. Right now in the United States, almost every business that employs minimum wage workers caps them at 29 hours a week. Without getting into the pluses and minuses of Obamacare as a healthcare system, one unexpected effect of that was once a temporary employee goes 30 hours or more, the business under most conditions, if they're large enough and multi-state, for example, multi-location, the business has to start paying into the Obamacare fund. The result of this is that everywhere people got cut to 29 hours. So even if you raise the minimum wage, you're going to have to raise it even further than $15 an hour in order to make up for the cuts in hours. I mean, a lot of the people who do those computations are basing this on a 40-hour work week. Nobody working for minimum wage gets a 40-hour work week. In addition, minimum wage workers generally get no benefits at all. They get no time off. If you get sick, you don't work that day. If you can't go to work, you don't get paid to go to work. If you're making, right now in New York City, the minimum wage is $9 an hour. It costs $2.75 to ride the bus or the subway. You're basically working a good chunk of your first hour to pay for the public transportation to get there. You're paying taxes that are taking another chunk of an hour out of it. I mean, this whole thing with the minimum wage needs to be looked at more broadly. The number rising is very important and very, very much a good start, but there are other factors that need to go in this as well. I want to address the price rise question because this is often cited by people as a excuse not to raise the minimum wage. When you talk about things like the Big Mac going up, 50 cents a burger or something along those lines, that still presumes that everything else for McDonald's is going to stay the same, including the multi-million-dollar salaries it pays its executives and things like that. If you're talking about board of directors who are paid collectively, whatever, pick a number, $150 million, and you reduce them down to $100 million and took that money, you wouldn't even have to raise prices. The extraordinary profits that these corporations are making, largely on the backs of workers that can't be paid any less. I mean, think what the minimum wage is saying. It's like, we'd love to pay you less, but we just can't get away with it legally, so we're stuck giving you this money. I hope you appreciate that. The other issue that was raised about, and the minimum wage is a topic I feel very passionately about. The other thing that was raised was how, well, the minimum wage, you raise it and jobs go away. No. First of all, in places like Seattle and Oregon, where they've raised the minimum wage significantly, that just didn't happen. Businesses hire people because they need them to make money. The number of people who are cashiers at Home Depot are what Home Depot thinks it needs in order to satisfy its customers and meet its own customer service standards. They don't say, gee, you know, we could afford to hire 5, but let's get 10, or anything along those lines. It just doesn't work that way. And the people on that Republican stage last night knew both the statistics and the business side of all this, and they chose to misrepresent it because they wanted to. Ben Carson was saying something about, you know, he worked for free or he worked for very low money when he was a kid, which presumes that the majority of our minimum wage workers are in fact high school kids, you know, earning pocket money, and that's not true anymore at all. Most minimum wage workers are adults who are trying to pay for their own lives and things like that, and they don't have the option of working for free or being interns, which is our new word for people who work for free here in the United States. So it was an extraordinary pile of bullshit that was shoveled out last night that was just thrown out to a bunch of Republican people who want to believe all that is true. The same way they wanted to believe, as Josh pointed out, I think, you know, that the unemployment among young African Americans really isn't all that bad and everything else like that. These are prejudices. These are cruel things to do to people who are struggling at the bottom of our economy.
Eric, did you want to add that the minimum wage should actually go down?
No, it should go up. But one thing, too, that Republicans tend to drone on about, they say that, one, you know, jobs will be lost, but what they fail to talk about is the fact that if somebody gets paid a higher wage, they're more likely to spend their money. So really, it just stimulates the local economy, and it's a reciprocal effect. And I feel like, and I don't know if it's intentional, well, it is intentional, but I don't know if it's ignorance or if they actually believe it, but they should clearly know, and many of the Republican candidates are educated individuals that should know this, that's how the economy works. When you have money in an economy, it gets spent, it goes in a cycle, and it comes back to the user. And I don't understand how they can spew on about the loss of jobs and how, you know, mom and pa are going to go out of business because they can't afford to pay their pizza boy anymore to, you know, make the pizza. It's ridiculous.
The other thing that's very important to understand is how much money tax money is being spent to subsidize the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Something like 47% of the people who get food stamps, we call it SNAP now in the United States, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 47% of the people who get SNAP are employed. They're working. They just can't earn enough at the minimum wage to properly feed themselves or their children. The same thing for
McDonald's that handed out SNAP packets to new employees. I think it was
Walmart. The minimum wage employees at Walmart and McDonald's represent the two largest groups in that 47% of employed people who collect food benefits. And that's just talking about SNAP, which has its own requirements. When you talk about women, infants, children, WIC, you talk about Social Security, SSI, and these others, they all have their own requirements, and oftentimes those are not calculated into this stuff. If you give people a living wage, then you don't have to subsidize Walmart and McDonald's paying their own people crap. That either can lower taxes or if you're a Republican, can give you more tax money to put back into the defense budget. But these kinds of things, people say, well, I don't want Walmart to raise prices. However, I'm going to pay higher taxes in order to subsidize Walmart's lower wages. It's kind of like talking about restaurant employees. The minimum wage here in New York City is like $2 an hour for tipped employees. And businesses are thrilled with this concept because I get to pay, as a patron in the restaurant, I get to pay, depending on whether I'm a cheapskate or not, 10, 15, 20% extra on top of the cost of my meal to subsidize those low wages for the restaurants. And people sort of forget about that. I'd rather see that money paid directly, not out of my pocket, but out of the restaurant. And if the restaurant raises prices 15%, it's still break even for me.
Well, Josh, is it realistic to push for a $15 minimum wage when you've seen that Obama's 1010 bill has been stalled for over a year now in Congress?
Well, not really. Not if you expect it to be $15 immediately. I think it was a University of Chicago survey of economists that found that the majority of economists that responded said that with gradual increases to the wage, the increased productivity and, like Eric was saying, the increased economic participation will offset any of those increases. So, if you can get it through so that over 5 years the wage increases to that living wage, then I don't think there will be a negative effect. The Center for Economic Policy Research, which, to be fair, is a liberal sort of organizational think tank, found that in 12 of the 13 states that raised minimum wage, job employment actually went up rather than went down. And all of those places instituted a gradual increase program. So, you can't expect, it is unfortunate, it is unfair that, not just Walmart and McDonald's employees, but also the two lowest enlisted ranks in the military. If you have a family, you qualify for welfare. That's the Army doesn't pay you enough. And I'm not sure about the other branches, but I'm sure it's the same. So it is an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's something that needs to be done. I think that they just need to will happen gradually, and that everyone will have a chance to acclimate.
Keep in mind about the gradual thing, and I think politically that Josh is right. I mean, that's one of the few ways that this has a chance of being sold. But keep in mind that the minimum wage has not gone up in sync with inflation. If it had, it would be over $20 an hour right now. And so taking several years to climb up to $15 an hour really is just going to make poor people a little less poor. It's not going to pull them out of poverty. It's going to simply give them another couple of years to kind of get their nose and lips keep above the water. And that's not to say that if you put a law in today that gradually increases the minimum wage, that a future legislature will figure out some way to monkey with it and take it away. In addition, if you throw in something fairly unexpected, like Obamacare, that all of a sudden has the secondary effect of cutting most minimum wage workers' hours from a cap of 39 to a cap of 29, then you've negated in that process most of any gain in actual wages. The net, I mean, somebody out there is smarter than me in math, but I mean, 29 hours times $10 an hour versus 39 hours at $7 an hour. I mean, somewhere you're only breaking even. And that's what we've got to get past. We've got to get to a point where people can earn a living in the United States doing the jobs that are actually available here in the United States.